In recent years, there's been an interesting resurgence in people who love themselves some tokusatsu, which is, broadly speaking, shows like Super Sentai, which is Power Rangers in the US, Kamen Rider, and Ultraman. It also includes series like Metal Heroes, which were brought over to the States as Big Bad Beetleborgs and VR Troopers. With the recent release of ssss.gridman, which is a cousin to Ultraman, I felt it was appropriate to take a look at another blast from the past in a very similar vein. This brings me to Guyver. Created by Yoshiki Takaya, the series started its manga run in 1985 and is still currently ongoing. What? Oh, hot damn. It's up to 32 volumes, though with that kind of length, it must be kind of losing the plot thread a little bit. Still, it's pretty impressive. You might remember Yoshiki Takaya from the last time Prophet ran an episode, which was on Hades' Project Zero Rhymer. He was responsible for the manga of that as well, and I have to say that, well, the man is talented at creating visually interesting creatures in mecha, plotting is not his strong suit. Still, Guyver has been extremely successful, having had 2 OVAs, 1 OVA movie, a 2005 TV series, and 2 live-action films, one of which is actually pretty good. The story of Guyver itself was something strange and out of left field when the series first started its run. Kamen Rider had always had a bit of an element of body horror to it, but it was fairly tame overall. Even Kamen Rider Amazon, which had monsters that bled when cut and bit by the near feral Kamen Rider, kept it within certain limits. Guyver takes that element and ramps it up to a full late 80s level, complete with high pressure blood, breaking limbs, and snapping necks. The Guyver fights monsters called zoonoids, which are human-alien hybrids fulfilling the role that Monsters of the Week normally would. The theme is biological weapon, which is interesting because the Super Sentai show that it aired the previous year was called Bioman. Apparently Takaya saw that and said, "Bitch, please, I got your Bioman right here." It definitely looks the part. It looks like what a design team would come up with if they tried to make a mech out of a mammoth. Still, there's no question that this design is iconic. You can spot a Guyver a mile away, if you know what you're looking for. So yes, the entire deal with Guyver is basically, what if Kamen Rider was really nasty and brutal? And overall, it succeeds at that, though you have to have a tolerance for excessive violence to get into the OVAs. That was where I ended up getting in, and I think it's a pretty good starting point, though perhaps I am a bit warped. That brings us to the subject of this video. What do you really say about an OVA from 1989? You know, I will say that it still looks pretty good. Now, granted that it's because it doesn't move very much, but let's get digging more into the series proper. The story concerns an average high school student, Sho Fukamachi. He and his friend Tetsuro and Tetsuro's sister Mizuki end up sucked into a world of violence and intrigue when Sho comes in contact with the Guyver unit, a bioweapon that encases its wearer in a suit of armor and gives them superhero levels of power. The armor can do all sorts of fun things, like shoot lasers and control gravity, and create high-frequency blades from the elbows. It's nearly impervious to conventional weapons, and comes in a variety of stylish colors. It's also the most sought-after item in the world by the Kronos Corporation, a company that has more money than sense and wants to control the planet. It's kind of like if Amazon had a monster creation facility. And out from those same facilities come all manner of grisly goons. If there was a Guyver beat-em-up, you'd fight some of these enemies on every screen. But the Guyver itself doesn't seem to care about how many zoonoids it destroys, because it's an unfeeling murder machine. Sho, on the other hand, is not an unfeeling murder machine, even though he continues to rack up a body count anyway. Also worth mentioning, the Guyver is only barely controlled by the control metal in its forehead. If that goes, it's game over for whatever poor sucker is wearing it. Much like Venom has to eat certain things to stay alive, the Guyver symbiote without a control metal will eat its host. It's gross. Like, really, really fucking gross. So needless to say, within the span of a few episodes, Sho starts freaking out once he sees what happens, and has to overcome the mental hurdle to keep doing his Guyver thing. It's kind of like watching a classic tokusatsu in super fast motion for the first episodes, between getting the power, being afraid of the power, and then battling a particular opposite number. The whole thing flows quite well, I must say. The back and forth between Kronos' leaders, the escalation of power as the zoonoids get tougher and more crafty, it all follows a very tried and true pattern for this single hero sort of story. Fighting against stronger enemies as they get closer to home really makes the stakes that much more real, at least insofar as something like this can be real. Having that sense of gravitas does do a lot to make it compelling. Considering many series would rarely bother to think about the ramifications of having such a thing in their world, even their acknowledgement would be nice. The actual inclusion makes it that much more interesting. It's sometimes added in just for the interest of increasing the drama, but it does fit with the theme. This sort of show just sort of highlights how utterly outrageous the whole transforming superhero genre is, and how much goes south when you don't suddenly teleport into that same weird rock quarry to fight your bad guys. Modern Kamen Rider shows have done a lot to get better about that, but this was made way before that was standardized. At the midpoint of the first set of OVAs, the Guyver is no longer fighting alone, which is good because show is kind of a putz. Guyver 3 is Guyver 1 but cooler, being a spikier version of the basic unit that show wears. This is Agito Makishima, who refers to himself as Zeus when addressing Kronos goons. Get it? He's about as sinister as you can get, as befits the son of a Kronos executive. Apparently he's also read ahead in the script, or is just genre savvy enough to get around it. Anyway, by this point everyone is horrifically traumatized and scarcely a functional human being, and the school got blown up by zoonoids. Sho has had 7 shades of shit knocked out of him for 3 episodes straight, and Mizuki is in on the secret. How could things get worse? Enter a big fuzzy bug named Enzyme. Now, Enzyme is a Guyver killer, though its effectiveness as a bioweapon is extremely limited. He's like a gun you can only shoot once, and then you have to rebuild the whole gun from scratch, and sacrifice a human test subject. The episode is entitled Death of the Guyver, incidentally. Don't worry, it gets better. This episode is probably the most graphic and best animated of the bunch so far. I think it's completely appropriate that these two bioweapons blasting the shit out of each other should look exceptionally violent and gory, after all. All the same, you can't keep a good superhero down, and even after Enzyme does his thing, Guyver 1 still has a trick up his sleeve. As appropriate to a weapon based on living organisms, Guyver has a respawn. And not a moment too soon. See, Kronos has fingers in a lot of pies, and apparently zoonoids are installed all over the world in positions of power, further cementing the point that we should be ready to eat the rich at any moment. By the Zoolord Guo's estimation, we're all just there to be made into zoonoids for his amusement. Guyver 1 and Guyver 3 disagree, and, well... Knock, knock, open up the door, it's real. With the non-stop pop out from stainless steel. By this point, this is the kind of battle that we've been waiting for, where the Guyver units get to go all out and wreck face, and after seeing them have to work so hard for every battle, it's nice to see them just kick ass. Guyver 1 is only partially with us at this point, but Mizuki snaps him out of it. Guyver 3 is about to take down Guo, who looks like Donald Trump by way of max headroom, but there's still one last zoonoid to take down, who weirdly got to this point through the power of friendship. Weird flex, but okay. It turns out the power of friendship can't stand up to the power of 2 Mega Smashers and getting a building dropped on you. Guyver 1 stands victorious, with Guo and Guyver 3 missing in action. And on a perfectly pleasant note, Sho and Mizuki reunite. This would be a perfectly fine place for this whole shebang to end. But, alas, it doesn't. No, Sho Fukumachi must suffer eternally if the length of the manga is any indication. Sadly, the animation tanks particularly hard in the second set of OVAs. We're introduced to a number of new characters, most importantly Sho's dad, who has "Marked for Death" written all over him. Mizuki and Tetsuro get kidnapped again. Agito, who was previously working just fine with Sho, just can't not be mysterious and invasive, and finds his position in Kronos a little shaky with the arrival of Dr. Balkus, a powerful zoonoid scientist. Also, he's got a sweet vertical monitor set up in spite of it being 1992. But there's a new ally in the fight as well, who has a giant zoonoid buster gun. Masaki Murakami has some sort of control power over the zoonoids and gets them set off against the other Kronos base where Mizuki and Sho's dad are being held. But now we're getting a lot of stock footage to fill time, a clear and kind of depressing indication of lowered expectations and misplaced priorities. Murakami is just there to get Sho out of trouble. None of the zoonoids seem quite as interesting as the ones in the first set, and overall, it's just a disappointment. They bust into the next HQ, which is apparently quite easy to do, and they rescue Sho's dad, Mizuki. Daddy Dearest has a surprise for Sho, however, as Balkus has turned him into another enzyme, this time called Enzyme 2. Bigger, furrier, more buggy. I'm sure a lesser critic would give Mizuki stick for being screamy and scared all the time, but you know what, given the situation, completely justified. Remember how I said the Guyver was barely controlled by the wearer? Yeah, if you bash a Guyver's skull in, expect a vigorous resistance from the suit. It works semi-autonomously to protect itself, which just leaves a big mess. I feel like the tension and pacing is a bit less together here, a little too much explaining of the obvious. But now Sho's back to being afraid of the Guyver, which is completely understandable. The animation takes an even bigger nosedive as the gang stumbles into a town full of zoonoids. Sho can't keep his armor up, so Murakami has to step in and do the job for him. Guys, if you have a problem maintaining your bio booster armor, talk to your doctor. It happens to lots of guys, but there is treatment, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. Even with one Guyver down, at least Agito is doing just fine in spite of getting punched up by Aptum, the mysterious new big bad. Agito is a combat pragmatist and it doesn't sit well with everyone else, but in the grand scheme of things, blowing up Zonoids is the one thing that Guyvers do best. It's kind of the only thing they're good for, to be honest. But the fate of this planet rests on Sho taking on Kronos, so hopefully he works past the whole killing of his dad thing. It's at this point that I have to touch on the editing that happened with the US release of the series. The DVD release by Manga Entertainment does some weird shit with the opening. That would be the kind of thing that would get modern otaku baying for blood. But more to the point, they decided that in spite of all the gore and body horror, showing a titty was a bridge too far. Kind of like Tumblr, I guess. So they cut out all the nudity in the final episode, not that there was so much, but the editing was so astonishingly sloppy that it ruins the last episode. An even bigger shame is that the animation quality spikes back up almost to where it was in the first series. But alas. Now, mercifully, that last episode is included uncut in the DVDs, but why did they bother to do it in the first place? At any rate, I'm glad things have settled the fuck down since then. So here's the problem with Guyver for a modern audience. It's a product of its time. It's very much old school Toku on offer, and that's not going to sit well with some people. Modern anime fans, really, especially considering the dated animation in the first half, and the downright awful animation in the second. But on the other hand, Devilman Crybaby was pretty much in the same vein as this, and people just ate that up, so maybe there's hope yet. There's a slight issue, though, that there was a remake in 2005 that got a bit further in the story and is easier to take pacing-wise. The art is more stable, and better yet, it's readily available, unlike the manga release, which is sort of ghosted by now. Currently streaming on Hulu, the remake is not quite as violent, but it's more judicious with its use of blood. One treat you'll be able to hear is veteran voice actors like Melissa Fawn and Steve Bloom in a script that's only passable, but darn it, they're doing their best. The series works best as a primer for the manga, which I really don't envy anyone trying to dive into, but it's also strangely satisfying as its own thing. The first DVD contains a fairly self-contained story, though it's rudimentary at best, and the two DVDs together have a fairly passable set of character arcs. Sometimes good enough is just good enough. And if you need more Guyver, there's always the two films. That being said, this is Professor Otaku, the greatest American anime critic, signing off.